Everybody. A small, no sorry, no, I'm not going to say that, am I? A packed, for the video, a packed audience here. There'll be no video of the audience, but I'm sure you've got lots of questions. I gave you a 10-minute tempter on Monday to invite you down into my underground bunker here, where we can sort of dig into more detail, because the Distripress Circulation Monitor is a monster of a report. It's absolutely packed with information. And what I want to do in this session is to run through, still quite quickly, but to give you a sense as to the riches that lie within it, but also to go back and, so that's going to be the first bit, but then to go back and if there are particular areas that you want to dig into in more detail, but it's just to give you a bit more of a flavour as to what is actually in there. We've been doing this is now the 6th year, and we've got a very clear progression and a very different sense from year to year as to what was actually going on. So the first one was actually quite a depressing one, of Distripress members trying to get to grips with the new reality that was emerging very quickly out in the marketplace. But it's peaked and troughed a bit in terms of how positive Distripress members feel about the world outside. That 2017 was an interesting year when everything exploded, and I think a lot of the pressure that had been building up within the whole distribution business came out in that year with a whole raft of mergers and acquisitions and consolidation. It was a very much a churning year. 2018 was more positive. 2019, as I think I mentioned in the original presentation at the forum, there is a much more mixed picture. The market clearly out there is very tough, it's very fast moving, everything seems to be moving at the same time. I think trying to find any firm reference points, but I think that's not just our business. If you look at the general media business, and this year, TV streaming, I mean TV, Apple TV Plus coming out, and has come up with a much lower monthly subscription fee than people were anticipating. There's a massive battle going on with, about to happen with Disney, AT&T, and a number of people coming into the TV streaming market. And personally, I think Apple will just lose interest in Apple News Plus. That just doesn't fit into, they'll bundle it back into something else, my suspicion is. So that it's a very tough marketplace in every aspect. Economic patterns, tech trends, political and social developments, what the consumer is actually doing. So there's fragmentation everywhere, but beneath the surface turbulence there are two key positives. Firstly, there are still hotspots of positive growth and activity, and also there are patterns behind the volatility. It isn't absolute chaos. There are some patterns, and we can track that, and I think that's one of the key things about the DCM, is being able to track some of the key metrics from year to year as we try and steer a course around the black holes to avoid getting sucked into the nothingness at the centre. And so it's those who are brave and agile who will survive. This is what the final DCM looks like. There are 4 sources of information. So there's Wessenden's own trawling of research data. There is the annual survey of Distripress members. 85 companies participated this year, which is still a very good response rate, a sign of an active membership. We zoomed in on 21 focus markets to dig into in more detail with a fair geographical spread, and there's general economic data from PwC, from Zenith, Optimedia. And each year we poll Distripress members as to what they want to see in this project. There's an ongoing interest in tracking the core operational metrics and top-line sales trends. There's a growing demand for tech And that's very much what the big picture is. We sort of look into what the consumer tech is, what wholesale tech, retail tech, and it may be, I'm going to skim over that in this presentation, but it may be that we go back and talk about that in the Q&A bit. I'm also fascinated to know what you think about what Amy Tipper of Amazon said on Monday, whether that was a surprise, whether it's scary, but I think the fact that Amazon is getting involved in single copy print in our market is potentially awesome. We can talk about that, and I think from Distripress point of view, it's a real coup to get someone from Amazon to come and speak. Amazon doesn't let its staff out to talk to people, and she had to pass this through her own internal police. But Amazonians tend not to be on public platforms, so I think it was well done, Trish. Well done.
Thank you.
So really interesting stuff, and she let slip a lot of stuff in between. It's a very tightly packed presentation. Anyway, we can talk about that one. But the big picture is very much about the tech that is out there. There is still an appetite for looking at new business models and revenue diversification activities, which we can put some case studies into the report, but I think probably, and we've had a couple of symposia, that's best tackled in the live program itself. And we had an interesting one with Readly and Ascendia yesterday of a digital operator operating in tandem with a traditional print supplier. Two specific additions, social and political. The political geography of news and magazines, that's becoming increasingly important. And also, we've dug into a bit more into the hot market sectors around the world. So it is a very big report. I'm going to, as I say, run through very quickly each of those key sections just to let you know what is in it. The big picture, as I said, this is very much the tech we're fighting for, the connected consumer, a consumer who wants control over their media consumption, but it also at the same time is overwhelmed by choice and wants to simplify things. And I think this is where the super subscriptions like Amazon Prime and whatever Apple decides to do with its lifestyle subscriptions, that there is a big tech is going to try and lock the connected consumer in. There's a lot of changing technology. The report itself picks out the 8 key megatrends that the media business is looking at the moment. Things like artificial intelligence. Voice is the big one that really nobody knows where on earth that is going to end up. But voice can, when you take the screen away, changes search, changes everything, undermines brands. Amy on Monday sort of slipped a bit in that they're doing stuff on voice as well on the publishing side. But that is a massive one. But beneath that, the report looks at 28 mini trends. So the big stuff there, blockchain, whatever blockchain is, still grappling with that, but everybody says, oh, blockchain's the future. I'm not quite sure it is. And there are massive security issues to do with blockchain. But there's all kinds of stuff going on there, artificial intelligence, virtual reality, augmented reality. But for most publishers, there are the mini trends, and it's things about optimizing your websites, email, newsletters. That's the day-to-day stuff, rather than the big megatechs. Fulfillment, home deliveries, going from wholesale to retail, controlling that with more intelligent targeting systems, warehouse automation. Retail, there's a lot going on there, with retailers going multi-channel, and also a lot of funky stuff going on in store. I actually think in tech terms, retail is one of the most interesting places at the moment, and to track what they're actually doing. And of course, Amazon is there. Amazon is backing into retail. In the UK, it is hovering around because it wants a grocery multiple. It was rumoured to have approached Waitrose. It was watching the Sainsbury-Asda merger to pick up some bits and pieces, and has the pocket money to buy either of them, because Walmart doesn't want to have a major shareholding any longer, wants to dump that. But Amazon wants to get into grocery because of frequency and locking people. It wants to crack food and build frequency. And it's also doing funky stuff with its Amazon Go. It's just walk out technology, it calls it. So it's got a couple of stores in the States which track you as you go around with CCTV and movement sensors. And it isn't based on transactions, it's based on stuff you take off the shelf, put in your basket, but then put back again. It records that as well. So it's recording purchasing intention, not just what you actually buy. So it goes one step beyond, and you just stick it in your basket and you walk out and boom, it deducts the money from your Amazon account. You have to check it first and say, yeah, okay, boom. So no checkout, no scanning, but it's collecting data on you with your purchasing intention. So Amazon is absolutely everywhere, like all over everything, like a rash. But there's a section in there about what Amazon is up to and why Amazon is interested in retail. A number of reasons. One is it thinks it's ripe for disruption, that it thinks that there are so many friction points in retailing that it can take out through its technology. But it also wants a physical network. Its fulfillment costs have doubled in the last 3 years. So it is trying to the final mile into consumers' households. It likes the click and collect solution rather than still offer home delivery. But it's doing all kinds of things, including buying a share in Deliveroo, which is another scary. So it is all over the place, and we can come and talk about Amazon. So the changing tech, it's a big industry, as both Corinne and I mentioned. Our industry, if you put news and magazines together, that's in total advertising and consumer spend. It's bigger than consumer books, it's bigger than cinema, it's bigger than radio, it's bigger than computer gaming. So it is still a massive and very important industry. And the publisher's revenue model is changing, looking for multiple revenue streams, shifting from advertising into content revenues, shifting from print to digital. But globally, 91% of total global circulation revenue still come from print. And they also deliver much higher margins than digital stuff as well. So that's the big picture. The political geography of news and magazines, a fascinating presentation from RSF. I'm not going to mention Menzies, but I think this lovely newspapers that never arrive is a wonderful in-joke. So those who've gone to the UK don't know what's going on there, but and we better cut it from the video. But there's lots of stuff about the politics of distribution in there, which is becoming increasingly important. And also in this survey, we surveyed Distripress members as to what kind of subsidies there are in their own particular areas. They tend to fall into supporting journalism, distribution ones, where the biggie is still postal rates on subscription copies. That varies a lot from country to country as to what kind of subsidies, but whether there are special rates for access to the retail supply chain, social government support for staff redundancies and restructuring. And there are a few countries, France, I mean, the French love to tax everything, so they've got all kinds of weird and wonderful taxes that they can play around with. But there's a lot going on in the UK at the moment, but I think there's a lot of lip service from politicians about looking after curated news. But that still is a big issue, and trying to control and tax the big social media platforms. But that's the political aspect. Looking at the business, at the top level, we're sort of looking at ad spend is actually probably, for media companies, is a more useful indicator than pure gross domestic product and GDP. But this shows where the growth is actually coming from. Eastern Europe, so this is 2019 versus 2018. So Eastern Europe is very much bouncing back, particularly from the troubles in the Ukraine, of oil prices and infrastructure. It is coming back very quickly indeed. How long it will maintain that is an interesting one, but Eastern Europe is coming out fast there, as is fast track Asia, as opposed to advanced Asia. Advanced Asia, that's Australia, New Zealand, South Korea, China and India are in there. North America actually showing some quite robust figures at the moment. Western and Central Europe, and interestingly the German economy really slowing down, and that's dragging Western and Central Europe, that average. Latin America all over the shop, you know, from Venezuela, Argentina coming out of recession, so that's sort of boosting the figures there. Japan is just such an oddity on its own, in sort of permanent, slow growth, and just a very odd economy. And then Middle East and Africa, North Africa. Middle East been very wobbly politically and with oil supplies and with local conflicts, and that's a really wobbly up and down area, but there's some hot spots and growth areas in Africa. So that's the general background. The report then goes into a bit more detail, and I flashed this one up on the screen on Monday. We pick out some of the individual markets, but you see newspapers still significantly bigger than the magazine business in total circulation revenues, and that's print and digital. So it's print and digital, it's retail and subscription, so it's the full overall content revenues. And in value terms, that's the compound annual growth rate that PwC are predicting from 2018 through to 23. So most of the markets in decline. Latin America, a very newspaper-heavy market, leading the most robust in terms of the newspaper business. Asia Pacific dominates both. I mean, there is a big question, and a question we touch on in the report, as to whether China is actually, well, it isn't an open market, but whether it is actually a real valid market to be taken into account in terms of exporting, because it is so difficult to get into. But Asia Pacific, but you can see the range of performance there, which the report goes into in a bit more detail. And also, this is the other area we've dug into a bit more detail and quantified, was to ask the question of all the Distripress members as to how their markets are moving in terms of sales in particular categories. We divide it up into 3 tiers. So the top tier, where there is actual growth, positive growth in particular territories for those categories, but generally those categories are outperforming puzzles, children and teenagers. Children and teenagers very volatile from year to year depending on the product life cycle, food and wine. Then we get the middle rung, and then the really, I was going to say dodgy, but so adult computer gaming markets that are in really quite serious decline. So that sort of quantifies and puts some figures onto what the hot and the cold market sectors actually are. The fourth section, tracking the operational metrics. This we track, so performance is how do you feel your performance, your business performance for your own particular company is over the last 12 months in comparison to the year before. So these are the percentage of Distripress members who say that it's better than last year. So they go up and down in the same pattern, but confidence is much more volatile, much more peaky and trophy. And you can see from year to year it wobbles about a bit, and 2019, as I say, reflecting the very volatile conditions, both those measures are down year on year. Although, what is clear, and I think one of the themes is, I think, the drifting apart of publishers and the middlemen of the wholesalers and distributors in almost all the measures. That the publishers clearly had their real pain last year, and it's the middlemen who are seeing the pain this year. So the publishers, when you come on to headcount, the headcount reduction is less in publishing. They had a tough time last year, but it's the middlemen where everything is coming out in the wash at the moment. So there are some significant differences between them. And then some of the key dynamics: 6% of global NMN sales are cross-border, newspapers and magazines. There's more steadiness in export sales. There are fewer publishers reporting growth in their export sales, but there's a lot of just saying we're steady year on year. So there is more stability. 71% of export operations are profitable. That's quite variable from year to year, dependent on exchange rates and local prices, but it's still a good, strong figure, and a lot better than it was a few years ago. It was 77% last year, it's 71% this year, only slightly down. 88%, the biggest figure ever, of publishers have an export promotional budget, but it is clear that the budget size is reducing, and that it's been targeted on fewer specific markets to get more bang for your buck, rather than spreading it out to focus on the hotspots. And I think this theme about focusing on the hotspots and driving growth in particular territories and with particular market sectors is a recurring theme. What are the publisher issues about growing sales? The opportunities. The publishers are putting more investment into existing products and developing those, more focus on subs and placed copies, more focus on digital, and digital for magazine publishers tends to be apps and digital editions. For newspapers, it's very much paywalls and paid websites, and to develop a presence in the growth geographical markets. Some of the secondary issues that come through: smarter consumer promotions, and there's some very clever, funky stuff out there using social media, live events. Again, is a key theme from the publishing point of view. The barriers, the obvious ones: the growth of digital, so the consumer trend. There is a real concern about rising costs of production, transport and logistics. Reducing retail opportunities is an obvious one. But this is sort of, interestingly, is slipping down the issue of concerns. Not because it isn't a concern any longer, but I think there's the feeling that there is less we can actually do about it. I'll come on to future opportunities a bit later on. But it's interesting how the stress is altering a bit. So those are the publisher issues. The other players, so the middlemen, the wholesalers and distributors, they see their opportunities, and this has come not exactly out of nowhere, but it's come very much up the list of things to do, of dealing directly with the consumer, whether that's through their own subscription operations, home delivery, and getting involved and getting closer to the consumer themselves, which I think is a very interesting development. New sales points going into non-traditional areas. getting involved in consumer promotions. In-store, yes, but also, again, this direct-to-consumer of dealing directly with them and making more of the hot categories, chasing the hot categories. The barriers, the growth of digital, the decline of print, and the sense, I think, that the middlemen feel that the publishers are retreating back, that they are not committing, they're not committing budgets, they are not committing headspace to developing the retail category, but I'll come back to that a bit later on. We track internal change, things like headcount. Again, this is another area, so 37% of companies are seeing headcount reducing this year, so that's up, but it's up with the middlemen. It's actually down with the publishers. As I said, publishers went through their pain last year. The scale of change is still high, but there is the sense, I think, that we're getting on top of it a bit more, and the rate of change is accelerating. 53% expect faster change in the next 12 months. The next area, mapping retailing, the key statistics in the 21 key focus territories we monitor, the rate of decline in the core retail universe is about 5% year on year, which is a bit more, it's accelerated from the 3 to 4% we've seen in the last couple of years. And then we come out with what we do in the survey this time, again, is to pin it down a bit more statistically, is to ask the change in market share held by different retail types. So it's those who see it in growing minus those who see their share reducing. So supermarkets is the only one where there is positive growth, and they are growing, continue to grow their market share. The average across those 21 countries is for newspaper sales, about 29% of newspaper sales to go through supermarkets, 44% of magazine sales. And they range from, Spain is very low, and I know talking to the Spanish representatives, they're very nervous about not letting, but dealing with the big, the Cortes Anglais and the other supermarket chains who are queuing up to get into newspapers and magazines. So it's a very low 7% in Spain, 68% in China. On magazines, it's 7% in Spain, again 75% in Sweden. So it's a very big range. And also how nice the supermarkets are varies a lot from country to country. I think the UK experience is that our supermarkets have turned out to be much nicer than we thought they were going to be. That I think we thought the model would be the American one, which was very much till and checkout based, which isn't what has actually happened in the UK. And the supermarkets have actually turned out to be much nicer than WH Smith, who are regarded as the nasty bad boys at the moment in the UK, as they ruthlessly try and increase their revenues and shelf space. So supermarkets and grocers, a really interesting indicator of what's going on around the world. Convenience and discounters. Convenience, a really difficult category to define. And discounters, Aldi and Lidl are in there as well. Petrol stations are in there. Each one of those is changing in virtually every country as the convenience top up. So more frequent, smaller top-up purchases is a general trend globally, and the convenience retailers are picking up on that. Non-traditional, still there's quite a chunk. I think it's almost a third of the focus countries have no non-traditional. So that's garden centres, coffee shops, business premises of going out beyond the core retail universe. Generalists, specialist press shops, and street kiosks. Street kiosks, again, very varied as to their share from country to country. On the continental Europe, street kiosks are very important. We in the UK don't have much of a street kiosk presence. you can see where it's all going. And there's a lot of experience and knowledge and range retailers who are dropping out of the bottom. I think that's the worrying thing, that there is experience and commitment oozing out of the whole distribution business. So let's look at the opportunities. We asked to score on what's the immediate action plan? A score of 1 to 10, how important? This has come out number 1, improving the efficiency of internal processes and practices. What's come up over the years is cutting costs, so ongoing grinding cost control. But this is one that a couple of years ago didn't feature at all, but has now come up and is now in second place of developing new products and services, diversifying. Publishers have been doing it for some time, and now it's very much top of the list for the middlemen. Investing IT, these are 2 scores that have dropped, and I think there's a worrying trend there of not investing in tech and not investing in staff, whether it's headcount, skills and training. Growing through acquisition is there, it's more tactical, and developing into new geographic regions is very much for publishers. But the actual, what is under current development, growing the opportunities. If anything, publishers are becoming now more focused, so growing the international audience, but doing it digitally. Leading with digital, whether it's websites or apps or digital editions, and the growth of the digital newsstands being a key factor. The shift of focus from single copy to subscription, both in print and digital. Although it's interesting, and again, one of the fascinating things about the Amazon presentation, it never actually occurred to me before, that with news and magazines, they're going in the opposite direction to what they've always started with physical products and sold physical books, physical videos, and then went digital. They've been digital only, apart from in the States, with news and magazines, and now they're backing into print. And what they're doing in Germany, and they're about to do in the UK, if they can get the supply chain to cooperate, is fast delivery of single copy print, what Amy was talking about on Monday. So the recurring themes, there are specific local projects, local print on demand, which I think is where Amazon would like to go with its single copy magazine offer, digital printing, a more structured program of local consumer promotions and engagement activities, and more sharing of print and logistics services with other publishers. The other players, the middlemen, have got a much wider range of things that they want to do. The key one is to grow from being a logistics to companies into marketing services, and to offer a one-stop shop for publishers. The 7 days operation, so the presentation that we saw on Monday, which was a very clear drift. I think they were saying 35% of their revenues were now non-press, and it was going to be 40% by the end of this year. So non-press products going through the existing network, including parcel delivery, selling logistics skills to new networks and industries outside the core newspaper and magazine business. Bolting on new networks, direct-to-consumer fulfillment. Again, so this sense of going direct to the consumer, of not letting the publisher drive that. Consultancy services to retailers, and then some specific projects. Print on demand, local e-commerce is an interesting one. Local e-commerce platform for publishers, and so on. So for future development, live events in local markets, video content, audio content, breaking down the issues into smaller information units to try and draw people in through articles, more agile one-off activity, whether it's pop-up shops, print on demand, and the other supply chain players, some of them having tried to create one-stop marketing shops are breaking them back down to standalone operations, so not standalone operation for merchandising, for marketing and subscriptions. And some of the things that we've already seen there, but the report goes into quite a bit more detail about what's going on, including the accelerated adoption of AI and robotics and automated processes, particularly in wholesaling. What is interesting, and I said, well, one of the shifts, whereas I think the sense in previous surveys was, we've got to do something to stop the decline in the retail universe. That is almost now accepted as a given, that is going to happen. And what is happening now, America isn't a very good example of anything, apart from how to stuff your own supply chain very quickly, of where they are deliberately cutting back on their retail universe. And this is coming up actually in a number of other territories as well. Pay on scan is a big issue floating around in lots of territories, but I think cost to serve is personally, I think is potentially much bigger than pay on scan. Pay on scan, personal view, I think the industry's got to face up. It's going to happen, and I think the industry should be on the front foot on introducing it, particularly into the supermarkets in a structured and positive way. But of cost to serve, that publishers are shielded by the middlemen from the real cost to serve outlet by outlet, and I think a number of the middlemen are looking at the retail universes that they have and saying, well, do we actually need that number of outlets? So there's a lot going on there, and a lot more radical approach to the supply chain, that nothing is off the discussion list at the moment. We've got to talk about it, and I think also Distripress is a great place for people to talk about their experiences, particularly as the business becomes more international. So, the overview, the immediate action plan is improving internal efficiencies, developing new products and services, particularly for the middleman, ongoing cost control for everybody, but worryingly there is less investment in IT and staff, and I think we can't as an industry, we need to invest in the future. The new opportunities for publishers, growing the geographical footprint, although a lot of that is through digital, focusing on repeat purchasing. And that can be done in the retail environment as well, with retail subscriptions. Distributors are growing their services and handling non-pressed products. So the overall, it's a tough 2019, but a greater acceptance, I think, of the changes, and we've just got to get onto it and take a more creative approach. We need more investment in IT and staff. Publishers and wholesalers are drifting apart, I think, more in their priority list and where they want to go with the supply chain, but there are some more radical solutions out there. And the growing political dimension to news and magazine distribution, but a stronger prioritisation of the growth opportunities rather than thinking about you can do everything at the same time. It's optimising the hotspots and avoiding the black holes, which is the theme of this year's survey. So, that is actually not so quick, but that's a quick canter through. I don't know if there's anything that you want to go into more detail. This packed audience for the video camera, leaving if there's anything. I'm interested, say Amazon, what did you make of Amy? Any surprises?
I think from my perspective, I'm a publisher for those at home, is that we want direct links with our customers. We don't really want a middleman of that nature. So I know whilst they are, saying that we're bringing in a different audience, we can bring people to you. At the end of the day, Amazon want them to be their customers, and we would rather have a more direct route. So I think that we will be avoiding using that sort of platform.
No, I think this is very much, and as Readly, because I know sort of in the UK, sort of Readly is a very expansionist and is going across a number of different markets. There is that tension because you want to set up your own sort of mini environment where you have that direct contact. But what is that they can surface specialist magazines. But it would be interesting to see and to learn from what they're doing. But they have a tendency. I've actually heard a presentation about Alibaba versus Amazon, with very different cultural approach. Alibaba much more open. They're actually coming. They're going to compete head-to-head for the first time later this year in India, and it'd be interesting to see which business model actually survives. But Amazon has a track record of competing with its own suppliers and brands, and going direct ultimately. Yes, but interesting one. But I mean, what is encouraging is that Amazon sees the power of newspapers and magazines to retain, to engage, and also to profile. That's the other thing too. So to know someone's magazine readership just takes it on to another level in terms of profiling their audience.
Jim, I have a question for you. We've with this being the sixth report, fifth. I should know.
Sixth.
Thank you. You talked about the themes from each of the years so far. So I'm going to put you on the spot and say, if you're standing in Estoril in 12 months' time, what do you think we'll be saying then?
We got through 2019. I think we will have more insights. It is becoming more and more difficult to generalise about everything, about the consumer who wants to be treated as an individual, about what works. I think we'll have more case studies as to what's worked and what hasn't worked in terms of diversification. But I think it would be adapting from the toolkit of various things you can do, of what's actually working and what isn't. But it's going to be very different from market to market. And just knowing what's going on in Germany and France at the moment with their supply chains, there are some fundamental differences there. And where loosening up the Loire Bichet, which is a potentially radical, very radical move. So I think there will be. I think a number of issues will have come to the fore. So I thought
there will be trouble ahead. I
there
think
will
going to break it
be
to
trouble. So I think we will see fragmenting business models, but I think that the big issues are increasingly the same issues. In the early days of the DCM, I think the Distripress member said, no, our market is so different from everybody else's. We just chug on and we do our own thing. I think the markets are actually becoming more and more similar in terms of the issues, as to who does what, margins, as well as to what retail margins are and what margins people in the supply chain actually take.
Hi, Jim. I wanted to highlight a point on investment on IT and staff. I'm surprised that you're mentioning that there needs to be IT investment, since I think one of the big trouble for publishers is as to invest in IT in black holes in the past years, and as a result they are stepping back from that, because whether it's Prestalis or Texture in North America, where it has been sinking money into IT stuff that they don't need. But I totally agree on staff, because as we are seeing it, is that there's a disappearance of knowledge within the circulation business, and publishers do not, I think, take a grasp of what they're losing in terms of staff.
Yes, yeah, and I think we have gone. I'm in danger. Well, my son is 39 and works in the media business. He's become a really grumpy old man about lack of skills, lack of work ethic from millennials, snowflakes. He's become a grumpy old man before his age. But I think there is a real change in staff as to what their expectations are, what their skills actually are. And there is actually a lot of reinventing of wheels within media companies. That some of the old stuff is coming back. Direct mail, for example, is coming back in certain areas, and physical print as well. And I think there is a lot of learning and knowledge that is seeping out of the industry, seeping out at retail end of retail specialists dropping out. But I think that we've got a real issue in terms